Mindful Coach podcast. I'm your host, Brett Hill. I'm a mindful somatic coach trainer, as well as a coach. So I do one-on-one work as well as mostly teach other coaches how to be more mindful and present in their work. This is a topic, this entire podcast series is really all about mindful communications and the importance of mindful communications in making a difference in our lives. And it's very, very difficult to overstate the value of spending just a little time in becoming a better communicator, a better connector, someone who can be present with other people in a deeply meaningful way, even potentially in what seemingly unimportant conversations. There's a very significant impact in your life from having those kinds of skills. And I've been fortunate enough to have had some amazing teachers and lessons and life lessons and pursuits of interest that have led me to a place where it's a pretty rich experience for me often when I'm just talking to people or to groups. And it's as if I wish I could just give this kind of experience away to people so that whenever I hear people saying, oh, I just don't feel connected, or I'm lonely, or I don't know how to reach people, or I don't know how to let people reach me, those are all skills that can be learned. And so this whole podcast series is about helping people to realize that you're not locked in a box. You can take effective action to improve your experience in communication and connection and relationship with yourself and with others, because they're really the same thing. Oftentimes people think, oh, if I'm going to I don't connect well with others. And I would argue, if I want to be put on that hat, that if you can't really connect well with others, or you feel like people aren't connecting with you, then you need to stand in the mirror and look back at yourself and go, how am I not connecting with myself? Because very frequently the problems whenever you can't connect outwardly are actually just reflections of those same problems you can't of not connecting inwardly effectively enough, authentically enough, and deeply enough, and I might say courageously enough, to actually be in touch with something so core, something so foundational, something so essential about you, that when you connect to that place and then you interact in the world, you speak to others, you're coming from a deeply connected place. And whenever you do that, you connect outwardly as well as inwardly. And now, not only are you creating connections, you're a bridge builder. Because the first thing that happens when people talk to someone who's pretty deeply connected is it starts to wire them up to themselves and wire them up to your presence and your own mindful presence. This is an extremely powerful way to walk through the world. And my wish for the world is that, oh my God, do we ever need these skills now more than ever, right? So this whole podcast series is intended to be a more or less a masterclass, if you will, if I could be so bold as to say that, in mindful communications. With that said, one of the things I wanted to talk about today specifically is empathy. Now, I'm pausing a bit here because this is a challenging topic. I have some things to say about empathy that some people don't actually like to hear, and then other parts of it are really empowering. Well, it's all empowering. This will make more sense as I move along. I think empathy is an overused, underappreciated term. And I'm going to press pause on that right there, because one of the things I stand on a little side soapbox and make a case for is I'm really unhappy with the way people use language these days. It's like people pick a word like empathy or trauma or, who knows, so many kinds of words, and they just throw them all over the place like they apply to everything all the time, and they don't. And so, and I think the difficulty with that is it diffuses the authority of those words, the power of those words to actually describe specific kinds of things. And so this is me not wanting to be right, but wanting to be correct. And it kind of irks me whenever I hear people casually throwing words around in situations where they don't belong. Another one is like people often, or sociopathic, or what's another one I want to say? Narcissistic. I hear those words a lot, and they're very specific meanings. It doesn't mean someone who's conceited. Narcissism is a specific set of neurological characteristics and traits that doesn't describe someone who's mostly looking out for their self-interest. A narcissist will be doing that, but that doesn't mean that if you are doing that, you're a narcissist. And so I'm going to, come back off my soapbox for a minute and just end with, please use words accurately. It makes life much easier and makes you a better, more powerful communicator. Pause, transition, coming back to empathy. Now, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take a breath, and maybe you can do this along with me if you're in a place to. And I'm going to connect to my own sense of feelings and what's going on with me. And this is like a precursor to empathy. I'm going to connect to my own thoughts, feelings, sensations. So what I'm doing is basically, simply, straight up, a mindfulness practice. Taking a breath, noticing the tension in my body, the excitement in my nervous system as I'm wanting to deliver this message to people and do it well and clearly and focused. And as I take a breath, I begin to deepen and relax. And I notice that relaxing in my shoulders, in my chest. And now I'm going to very on purpose connect to what I call my heart. And this is, the feeling center. And for me, and this isn't true for everybody, but for me, my heart there's a sense of my heart, and it actually is around my chest, which is kind of strange. But they talk about feeling your heart. Well, I actually can feel, and I don't know how to describe it, but sort of I don't want to call it energy like electricity, but it's just sort of, you see the pictures of like ET with the glowing heart, that kind of thing. It actually feels like that to me. And whenever I connect to that, I warm up. And I'm going to see if you can notice. I'm going to just try to be as authentic as I can. A change in the way I speak. I'm going to take a breath and relax. It's taking a little longer than I thought because I have to narrate. Take a moment there. And now I'm going to connect, and this is the magic part. I'm going to connect that to my voice. And I'm going to try to speak from a place of more emotional connection on purpose in the moment. I'm not going to judge it like good or bad. And as I'm speaking right now, I can say I feel that space in me about 60% more than I did before. I feel a little slower and a little more heartfelt. It's almost as if I could see someone standing in front of me and I see a twinkle in their eye and I'm connecting to that twinkle. And it's just an imaginary thing because I'm doing a presentation. I have a camera in front of me, but there's a person on the other end of that. And I know that in my heart. And I have a wish for that person, for you. And that wish is for you to have an authentic, lovely experience of life. Now, the title of this particular episode is about men and empathy. And I want to say that this capacity to connect to my heart, to connect to my inner world, and purpose, wire that up to my voice, and look at other people and see a bigger picture of who they are, is something that is not deeply encouraged in men, and to the detriment of the world. And I'm going to talk in some detail about that, and particularly, some history around my experience and the way I was brought up and the way men are socialized to be, you might say, kind of the opposite of empathic. And they're actually pretty deeply rewarded for that. And yet, there are millions of heartfelt, loving, beautifully sensitive men out there. And I want to say, if they're struggling just like any sensitive person is, women too. But more, I'm not going to say more like the burden is greater, but it's different. It's different for men because we're told, you have to man up. You have to plow through. You have to just, men don't cry. Big boys don't cry, right? It's like, that is a layer of that's a social norm in some worlds where you, as a little boy, you hear those things. I remember, I'll talk more about this later. After our break, I will talk about, boy, this is kind of vulnerable for me to talk about. I grew up in Oklahoma, and I got slapped by a man standing next to me for caring. And I don't tell the story very often because it's a little bit vulnerable and it brings up stuff. But it's important for this particular topic, as it makes very clear the point I was trying to make about men, the way that we're conditioned. Now, here I am, an older guy after has been through a lot of training, and I help people learn to speak their somatic truth about who they are into the world and stand in that truth and be courageous about exploring kind of the strength of their shadow, if you will. And that's important work that I came to because I am a reasonably sensitive character, and I have been my whole life. Now, I grew up in Oklahoma and I was a young boy a long time ago, in the late 60s, basically. So I was too young to be kind of a hippie, and so I kind of didn't quite catch that train, but I was nevertheless deeply influenced by the, summer of love and the love culture and the anti-war sentiment of the time, which was profound. And of course, there was a big upheaval in the land. In my life at that time, growing up in Oklahoma, as you can imagine, a very conservative still area where the social stereotypes run deep. And to walk outside those stereotypes is not only challenging, it's dangerous. You can get hurt for being someone who doesn't kind of toe the line based on what people expect you to do. An example was I was hunting. Now, I hate hunting. I always did, but it was part of the culture. And so here I am, a young boy, probably like 14, 12, 13, 14. And they put a shotgun in my hands, and we went out in the morning and with all the guys and the trucks and the dogs. And, it's straight up stereotype as you could possibly imagine about, a country group of guys going hunting on a fall day. And we get out there and we're out in the farm, somebody's farm, and they let the dogs loose. And these were like regular dogs. They were dogs they had for hunting. And they would go out and they would run through the bushes and they'd scare up the birds and the birds would fly and then you shoot them dead. And that was fun for people. I was aghast at the idea, and the experience was, and I'm going to hold on to the table here. The experience was very disturbing. And so, here you are, though, you're sitting there and you want to here come the birds and they're like, shoot, shoot, shoot. So I pull up my shotgun and I point it at a bird and I shoot it. And it comes falling out of the sky. And I'm like aghast, like, oh my God. And what happened here? And they're like, hey, whoa, yeah, you got one. And I'm like, what happened? And so the dog comes, grabs the bird, brings it back, sets it down at my feet. The dog was great, right? And so they kind of picked it up and handed it to me. And I've got this bird in my hand, which I had just killed. And I'm looking at the bird and I start to cry profusely because I'm going to cry now because I've injured this animal and I can't fix it. It's, it's like I've done a damage that I can't repair, and I've taken something away that I didn't really want to do. And it was something holy. I'd taken the life out of this bird. And when the guy next to me, he wasn't related to me, I started to cry, and he just reached up and he slapped me across the face as hard as he could. And I just almost stumbled backwards. And he said, shut the beep up, stop your crying, you crybaby. And all the other guys look, and they don't say anything, of course, because they don't want to be complicit in being weak. And so I, had to kind of stuff my feelings because I didn't want to get beat. And at the same time, I'm left with this horrible experience that I have no way to resolve. I didn't do any more shooting that day, and I didn't ever hunt again. But that was a clear example of the kind of brutality and the insensitivity that I was exposed to in training to be a man, man up, right? Kill animals for fun and enjoy it, or you're not a member of the gang. And, that was never who I was. It would be impossible for me to be that person. And so I always was out of place in where I grew up because of my sensitivities. And I know that I'm not alone. I know there are thousands of millions of stories out there like this. Because I meet really beautiful, sensitive men in the world who struggle with their sensitivities and have similar abuses. Many of them, of the ones that jump out to me whenever I meet them, are the people who are either neurodivergent in some way, or they're on the edges of society. And I call it edges, but I don't really mean like they're fringe. I'm just saying there's a bubble of norms, and you're either in line with those, like be a man, and that means, man up and don't be a wimp and don't be a wimpy kid, and that kind of thing. And you want to be the hero, the survivor, the victor, the superhero. That is the image that we're giving to live up to. And there's a great cost to that, culturally and personally. And a lot of the men I was going to say that I meet that also struggle with this are the ones who are non-binary, or they're gay, or they have some other kind of orientation to their sexuality that isn't normal for the culture, I should say. Pardon my language there. And I'm still using the wrong word, not normal. I would say the predominant bias. It's just me being clumsy. Pardon me. These people, all these men deserve to live in a culture where we're celebrated and where we can thrive just like everybody else in the world. Instead of being shamed for who you are and what goes on for you, it's authentic and real. And that's an element in our culture that's undervalued, underappreciated. And so when a man or a sensitive person encounters a context, a person, a source, a resource, a safe haven where they can not have to worry about, am I going to get hurt here because of who I am, physically or emotionally? Those become exceptionally important islands, if you will, or safe havens. And that's the reason a lot of folk like that turn to arts, like theater or music or, band or, singing or whatever, wherever it is that you can find a tribe where it is more okay for you to be who you are without being judged so horribly for your own native sensitivities. Now, some people might think that, this notion of male sensitivity is a neurological thing. And that, there's like women's intuition and empathy is part of more of a female trait. And I wanted to talk about that for a minute, in that there's, like back in the day, there was this book, what is it? Men are from Mars, women from Venus. And it was kind of like all about male-female differences. And that kind of led into a conversation about the difference between male and female brains. And for quite a long time, there was some research that's showing, the brains are really different. And it's true, there is some difference, but the differences now they have looked at, come back and done a lot of review over all of that research. And what they've reframed the entire thing saying, well, yeah, there are differences, but they are not very big differences. There's actually not that much difference between the male and female brains, and they are very much alike in the sense of the vast majority of all the structures and the functions are the same. There is some difference in size. However, those differences are not necessarily, how should I say, they're not scientifically accountable for supporting the notion that, women are more empathic. Might be some hormonal aspects to that, but chemical, neurochemical aspects to that. But in terms of the actual brain structures, the science doesn't really support the notion that neurologically women are more inclined to be more sensitive than men. And that's an interesting point, because that means then, if that's true, that means that men are walking around a lot more sensitive than people realize. And they just are, it's just beat out of them. It's just shocked out of them. It's just culturalized out of them. It's put so far back that you can't even touch it sometimes without all this defensiveness. And there's a tremendous cost to that in our culture and personally. And I just want to lay claim to the fact that I'm a sensitive guy, and I'm on a mission, if you will, to help other people be okay with their sensitivities and learn how to be in relationship with that in the world in a way that doesn't harm you. Now, that's the next part of this we'll talk about after the break is there's a lot of empaths out there, empathy people who are sensitive and people who connect with other folk fairly easily, and they feel totally victimized by that sensitivity. And they're walking around going, oh, I can't stand it that I'm so sensitive. And there's some truth to that. And then there is another side to that I want to talk about. That's how empathy is sometimes a way to kind of, how should I say, inhabit your shadow rather than celebrate your connection. And we're talking today about empathy, and empathy in men specifically. And while I'm focusing on the male's experience, if you will, primarily or as a key focus here, a lot of the same notions I'm going to talk about in this next segment apply to anyone. And so it's not exclusively the domain here of men, obviously, because women in generally rate to be more empathic than men across the board. And the argument I was making before is that the neurological basis for that is kind of difficult to find, but nevertheless, there is evidence that shows that women score higher empathically than men. And I think largely, and this is just my personal opinion, because we're socialized out of it, I think men have the capacity to be deeply empathic. However, there is very little social support for that. And consequently, in fact, there's anti-social support for it. That, you're encouraged to be kind of cruel, actually, to put it bluntly. Men are actually who are mean and sort of over assertive often are deeply rewarded in this country for their aggressive, go get them, get her done sort of, attitude, which often involves hurting other people emotionally. I'm not talking about physically, of course, but although there are plenty of people who will pick a fight with you physically, that's not usual. But even so, I want to say that there's the old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, is simply untrue. Words hurt profoundly and deeply, and can cause extreme damage to people. So I want to put in a little side note here, like I sometimes do when I'm talking, because I mentioned earlier my other side note was about the use of words and using them in ways that where we're a little more careful about the words that we use and for precision's sake, so that we're not just throwing around a phrase, so that every time we see somebody who's unhappy, we say, "Oh, that's trauma," or you think you're depressed, and you go, "Oh, that's trauma," so that trauma becomes a label for every single negative thing that ever happened to anybody, which devalues the entire meaning of trauma. It's almost like if you said, "Oh, every person, if you get sick, someone's got appendicitis," and so someone gets a flu, and say, "Oh, they've got appendicitis." Pretty soon you lose the meaning of what does it mean. It's a very specific kind of illness. Trauma is the same way. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm trying to make a case for the careful use of words. And as I said, words can hurt. Words can hurt deeply. And what does that? That means that there's power in language. And what I don't see is a respect for that in the general population. That there's a tremendous capacity in the words that we use to either injure or heal. So how much of our inner world is around, are these healing words? Are these hurting words? How much do you take responsibility for that power which you have? If I said to you, I'm going to do a podcast on this topic. If I said to you, imagine every word costs $100. You'd be a lot more judicious about the words that you use. But we have an unlimited supply of words, so we don't meter them out. Imagine every word you spoke, you thought of as a seed. What kind of seeds do you plant? Every single one. And if you were just mindless about it, pretty soon you've got stuff planted all over the place, and some of it's pretty great and some of it's pretty bad. But it's unconsciously created. You've just got stuff everywhere. Whatever comes to your mind, you just spew it out. And consequently, the stuff that you're inspiring to grow in the world is not intentional. And I'm going to invite you to be intentional about it, to consider that there's tremendous potential power in your words. Now, if I'm just talking about what I'm going to have for breakfast, that's one thing. But when you're speaking to other people, what is the impact of what you're saying and what you're doing and the way you're behaving? You can own that and become a force for good in the world through it. You speak less and have much more authority because you're listening more and you're connecting more. Now, coming back to empathy. With male empathy in particular, because it can be seen as a weakness to be sensitive, a lot of men hide their sensitivity. And so they don't feel safe, they don't feel comfortable. And so one of the things that needs to happen or wants to happen in men in general is they need safe spaces in which to express their vulnerability. And those spaces are kind of hard to find. Now, they'll find them you can find them in relationships with the right, caring others, and sometimes in friendships. But the social constructs for those are very difficult. There is one organization called the Mankind Project. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They do a lot of work around this kind. So there are men's groups and those kinds of things where you can go and you can talk about what's it like to be a man in the world. And in those groups, if they're led well, and I want to be clear that they're not all led well, but many are, and they intend to, then there'll be space for you to talk about your own sensitivities in ways that you're not shamed for them. Because in those sensitivities, there's a lot of brilliance. There's a lot of what John Eisman, who was the founder of the Meta Institute in Portland, which used to teach mindful somatic techniques like Hakomi and recreation of the self. He had a phrase for this called the spirit in exile. Spirit in exile. And in a lot of men, their sensitivities are in that exiled spirit part of them that gets slapped out of them by the culture. To invite that back into the world is a challenge because the world doesn't really celebrate that as much as it could. So you have to connect to something within you that allows you to want to bring this forward. And then the next part of this is to create a context in your life where you're honoring and respecting your sensitivities. And this leads us into how to be empathic in the world in a way where you're not really harming yourself. We live in a world that is deeply insensitive to human nature. Now, I'm going to broaden this out now and go, this is just about human beings. We are much, much more sensitive beings than the world that we have created for ourselves. It's sort of like, you wouldn't put an ant in a swamp and expect it to thrive as an environment for itself. I mean, you might in some ways, but honestly, I don't know about it so much, but let's just say you wouldn't put a snake in the Arctic, right, and expect it to thrive. But in some ways, that's kind of what we've done. We're these extremely sensitive beings, and we've created a very hostile world to that, a world that makes us numb to our sensitivities. And what I mean by that is, take yourself out of your whatever world you're in right now in the United States and go stay in a rainforest for 2 weeks. And you'll know what I mean. Your nervous system will begin to change because suddenly you're not having to deal with the noise, the chaos, the constant stimulation, the continuous requirement of planning and sequencing in exceptionally complicated scenarios like, oh, gee, I've got to do my taxes. I've got to take care of my finances. I've got to show up for work. I've got to deal with a car that's exceedingly complex. I've got to deal with all this technology. If you just erase that out of your life, who would you be? Who would you be then? All of it. You would be somebody. And, dial back the dial like, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and we didn't have all this technology. We didn't have the cars. We didn't have a lot of these things. And people were people. We don't know who we are anymore without these things. And they continuously distract us from the connection that we are longing for, that we want to have within ourselves and to the world. And don't get me wrong, I'm not down on technology what I'm saying is we are living in a world that is disconnected by design. And that's the reason I'm doing this podcast, is how to help us get reconnected and rewired up to our sensitivity. So we'll talk some more about empathy and how you can be in the world in a sensitive place and not be a victim of it. Because we're not, as a culture, embracing the kinds of values, behaviors, and creating environments where we can thrive. Instead, it's destroying us. the world we've built is literally destroying us. Now, there is an answer to this, but it requires that you not rely on the culture to solve your problems or to engage. And if you follow what the culture would have you do, you're going to wind up, kind of unhappy, because what the little sleight of hand is that if you have the right kinds of things, if you have enough money in the bank, if you have the right car, if you have the right bling, if you wear the right outfit, you get the right scent on your body, if you have those things, that you'll be cool enough, attractive enough, powerful enough to be happy. And the truth is, none of those things will make you happy. Now, not having them can cause problems. If literally, if you don't have a place to live, you got a problem. However, isn't necessary to have any of that and be content, happy, whole in the moment, and to be in rapport with the amazing amount of beauty that's around us everywhere all the time. Answer to that is no. It's unnecessary. You can choose to be connected to something that's beyond the conditioned world, and that's your nature, who you truly are as a manifestation of life itself. Is not about the conditions of your life. Now, I'm not in any way trying to diminish the suffering or the challenges that come into our lives. Profound they are. Yet, the majesty of the mountains, the beauty of the sky, the power that is the same power that animates our very life, our very being. And when you connect to those things and you feel the awe of being connected to the mystery of a deeper presence that manifests everywhere all the time, when you connect to that and you walk through your life in that way, then when you speak to somebody, you feel deeply connected, even though you don't necessarily even know who they are. You don't know the details of their life, but the fact that they're standing right in front of you and you're experiencing them and you're having a deeply connected experience with this moment and they're in your moment, you're connected. We are all insanely connected. So it's really important to develop a capacity to relax enough about all the conditions and the inner naysayers, your own inner world that says, well, no, you can't have that, and no, you can't do that, and just let yourself be. And you begin that through a practice of mindfulness. That's why I teach mindfulness to not directly like, here's how to be mindful, like the John Kabat-Zinn approach, which is fabulous and people should do it, mindfulness-based stress reduction, but a more relational approach, a more connected approach, connect to your experience, to your life. When you begin to do that, you begin to develop a capacity to connect to people in a way where you don't take on their stuff because you connected. Now, there's this thing they call empathy neurons, mirror neurons. And it's a part of your neurology, so that whenever you connect, when you see someone who's jangling you, let's say someone's angry, that activates your mirror neurons, and you start to feel a sense of that in yourself. Now, a lot of empathic people walk around going, oh, I'm so worn out by my experience of other people. Like they walk away going, I'm a jangled mess after that. And that can happen whenever you are, you reverberate so much to your experience of others that it shakes you, that you don't know, you kind of lose your connection to your core, to who you are. When you're a healthy empath, I'm going to call that an unhealthy relationship to empathy. Because frequently a lot of empaths are empaths because they've learned that they have to be sensitive and over alert to other people's moods and expressions in order to be safe. So often people develop empathic capacity as a defense mechanism for being in an unsafe world. An example of that might be, let's say you're a young girl or a young boy and your mother or your father is very unpredictable. And sometimes they're in a great mood and everything is fine. And sometimes they're not. And sometimes you could be even physically in danger for either abuse or emotional abuse. So it becomes super important that you're tuned in to exactly what's going on with them so that you know, is it okay? So you're like, am I okay? Are they okay? Are they okay? What kind of vibe are they turning? And if you spend your developing years learning to read other people's emotions because it matters to your safety, then as an adult, you're walking around reading. Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And somebody starts to blow up and suddenly you're not safe anymore. That's a relationship to your sensitivities it's a legit sensitivity, but it's overdeveloped in a specific way because you're trying to keep yourself safe in the world that isn't or wasn't. That's a whole nother problem besides just straight up how to be empathic in the world. I mean, it involves that. When you really work that piece and you realize, I don't need to be defended like that anymore, then you realize what you have to defend against is overstimulation. And you begin to curate, you take ownership of curating your experience in a way that honors your sensitivities. You curate your experience in a way that honors your sensitivities. That is exceptionally, profoundly empowering for an empath, because then you are owning who you really are. And you're saying, I am a sensitive person. And that means I cannot be in the world the way other people are. And if I try, it's going to hurt me and it's going to hurt other people too, probably. And so, men in particular, finding a way to be courageous about your sensitivities. It's kind of right. It's like, be a hero about your sensitivity, right? It's like, but in a very, very gentle, supportive, accepting, non-judgmental way. Accepting the woundedness and accepting the gift of it, and finding a way to dance like a wild man on the beach by the bonfire, celebrating your wholeness as a man in the world, and also I want to say as a woman in the world. As women in the world. And in that way, we can celebrate each other and we can be connected to each other in a way where we create a world where we can all thrive and honor our very natures. And the path to that, if you don't even know where to begin, mindfulness. Start a mindfulness. You can go to my website, bretthill.coach, or actually, let's say themindfulcoach.com, themindfulcoach.com. If you don't know how to begin, go to themindfulcoach.com and look up how to begin a mindfulness practice. Or you can write me, brett@themindfulcoach.com. I'll help. So thank you for listening. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, follow the show and leave a comment. That's really helpful to get the word out. The Mindful Coach Podcast is a service of the Mindful Coach Association.